you and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, midweek edition. Today we intend um, to talk black. Our topic today is, of course, Black Power Today. We are going to be touching on top issues um, from the standpoint of Guyanese and people in general. Um, we're going to try to tease out some very important questions as they to us. It's Black History Month, of course, February. And so we are going to be talking Black tonight. Those of you who were on this morning and Bostonian morning, we had quite a discussion on Mr. Sue and the new USAID report and what is meant by that. We apparently there has been a lot of feedback after this morning's program. I myself have gotten a lot of calls and emails, inboxes, etc. I've not been able to get to all of them because it's been quite a busy day for me. Sometimes the day gets away from us. But here we are this afternoon. Come on to Politics 101. We endeavor on the program as with all the programs that I am on to bring to you education in the broader sense, in the popular sense, popular education, analysis to take you behind the news. Sometimes we get caught up with what is before us. And often what is before us is not really what is meant for us to understand the subtext, what is behind the news, what is behind some of the things that come us. And so we try in this program to make a difference in that regard. We start off standpoint that there's always something to be done. There's always something to explain, and struggle is something that is constant. It is ongoing. That there is not a quick fix to social problems, political problems, economic problems. That a lot of these problems, if not all of them, are grounded in historical evolution of our society in the world. And I was making the point this morning that sometimes so narrow in outlook that we lose sight of the world around us. We get very narrow in terms of thinking the world is our political party. And we get caught up in what's happening in the political party and we forget that there is a country around. And sometimes we get so much caught up in the rivalry among and between parties that we forget there is a world around us, a Caribbean region around us, a hemisphere, a world around us. And we pay dearly for that. The previous government, the coalition government, if we can make a criticism of that government, is the fact that that government governed as though it had no sense of what was happening around it. That there was a world around it, that we had gotten oil, and that had changed changed Guyana. You know, so and by the time it realized it, things had really changed. So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Tonight we are going to be talking about the African Guyanese condition and how does that fit into the larger politics of Guyana and the rest of the world. I'm expecting our two guests tonight to be Tacuma Ogunseye and Rickford Burke. We're going to bring them on in a minute. But what we're going to do, we're going to take a short break for about a minute or so, and we are going to sort out some little technical problems, I understand, and we'll be back. So we'll be back in 1 minute or so. I'm David Hines, political activist and commentator. If you're looking for informed discussion on Guyanese politics, you must join me every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 6:30 on Politics 101 with Dr. David Hines. On that program, I interview policymakers, politicians, political activists on Guyanese politics in the past and the present. So make sure you tune in to Politics 101 on CAMS TV at 6:30 every Tuesday and Thursday. And on Mondays at 7 o'clock in the evening, 7 p.m., you can join me for Hindsight. On that program, I give my take on politics. And then you can call in and talk to me about the politics in Guyana, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world. That's Monday evenings at 7 o'clock. And so here we go. Monday, 7 o'clock, you can join me. On Tuesday at 6:30, Politics 101. On Thursdays at 6:30, Politics.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
And welcome back to Politics 101. I'm David Hines, of course, and I urge you to share the link and let's get on with the business of our discussion tonight. As I said, it's Black History Month, and we want to have a discussion of our politics and our culture, our society, and how that is impacted by the Black condition and how the Black condition influences the politics of Guyana and beyond. So welcome if you're in Guyana, if you are in the rest of the Caribbean, in North America, in Europe, welcome on down to Politics 101, and let's talk tonight. I hope to open the phone lines sometimes so that we can hear from you. We can hear from you. So welcome. I think we have a brother Tacuma Ogunseye here. and he's ready, I think. Brother Tacuma, welcome to Politics 101.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here once again so quickly.
Yes, right. You were here last week as part of that team discussing the budget, and I see Rickford Burke is here.
I'm here. Good night.
Yes, good night, Rickford. Good night, brothers, and welcome. It's Black History Month, and we have a lot that's happening in Guyana, and we talk about Guyanese politics and Guyanese society, and there is so much happening that sometimes we forget that Guyana is made up of different ethnic groups, and that these different groups don't always view the world in the same way, that they are things that are particular to groups in Guyana that we tend to miss, and so forth. And of course, the question of race is always a difficult question to discuss in a society like ours that is a plural society, a multi-ethnic society, and people are quite sensitive when the matter of race comes up. People prefer to deal with race in the bottom houses, in the background, and never want to have a sensible discussion about it. So let me start with you, Tacuma, because you cut your teeth on cultural politics. You were a founding member of ASCRIA, the African Society for Cultural Relations in Independent Africa, which is still perhaps the most significant Black organization that has emerged in Guyana in the post-emancipation era in last week, or I think this weekend. No, it might have been last weekend. I did a short, brief history of ASCRIA in the Village Voice to kind of tug our memory of the significance. But you were very much part of ASCRIA, and so you have a good sense of what we're talking about. Why is it important, Brother Ogunseye, for us to deal frontally with the question of race in a country like Guyana?
Okay, are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
I think that every Guyanese by now should have a little difficulty of understanding our history. And the Guyanese society has been shaped by race from the time the Europeans arrived in these parts of the world, the treatment of the indigenous people, and then the enslavement of Africans and the bringing of indentured servants and so forth. And the fact that in order for them to maintain their dominance and control, they had to work out very deliberately, to structure the society to take advantage of race in the sense of putting various race groups against each other. It is in that kind of evolution that the Guyanese country and the Guyanese state evolved in. And there is no way that you could avoid the question of race, in trying to come to grips with the challenges that are presently facing us and the challenges that have faced us historically. Now, what have happened in our society as we engage in the anti-colonial struggle, when the target of that struggle was the Europeans and the white race, we in Guyana's local people had little difficulties in understanding the race dynamic in the equation. But once, quote unquote, the white man had been removed, quote unquote, and we had to deal with our own selves and engage in a political struggle that put the various ethnic groups in conflict and against each other, fighting for economic and political power, okay, it is in that context that unfortunately, okay, the negative aspects of race surface as we remember the conflicts of the 60s and so forth and so forth. And what have developed since then is for us to go very opportunistically in a mode of denial when it suits our purpose. You will find that Africans are conditioned to understand and identify racial behaviors in the Indian community. And the Indian community is cultured to identify racial behaviors in the African community. And we seem to only see race as it relates to the other side. And I think that it have led to kind of opportunistic approach to the problem, which has been worsened by political opportunism, where the political forces that develop in the equation, for the greater part, the two major parties, both the PPP and the PNC, have deliberately seek to avoid race, even though they benefit from it, but they have tried to treat race as a non-significant issue in as far as the public discourse goes, but behind the scene, they calculate and they strategize based on race.
And I think that point that you made there at the end, the way in which both political parties, in fact, all political parties, benefit from race, yet do not discuss race in an honest way. But behind the scenes, race is very central to their calculations. I think that is a very salient point, and that is part of the problem that we have with race in Guyana. Rickford Burke, you are of a younger generation, and you've been very vocal on what you see as the race politics of the current government. Of course, it is very difficult for a human being to speak eloquently about what they did not experience unless you would have studied it and so on. But you are very clear that when you come to the question of race, it is out of your lived experience, most of it which has been spent either living or observing the People's Progressive Party in power. Therefore, for you, what would you say, what would you introduce the subject tonight by saying?
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me on. I want to, and good night to Kuhn. I want to put the significance of Black History Month in context.
Well.
It came about because of a recognition that the brutality of slavery, the inhumanity of slavery, the fact that over 6 million Africans died during slavery, and the fact that every effort was made to keep people from Africa, the African diaspora and Africa, impoverished, starved of opportunities, starved of the ability to survive, starved of economic justice and freedom. And in spite of all of that, African people have contributed to the construction of the world. We have contributed to science, the arts, culture, medicine, law, jurisprudence, all across the world. And here in the United States, have built the foundations of this nation. In Guyana, built the foundations of Guyana. Indentured slavers, indentured service came, but they didn't have the same, putting it now coming to the Guyana context, they did not have the same experience as slaves. They were paid. They were indentured servants. They were servants. There were ways that they benefited from their service. Slaves were slaves. We were there to work for the master, eat what the master gave us, our ancestors rather, wear what they wanted us to wear, and be treated how they wanted us to be treated. They did not believe that blacks were a full human being, were full human beings. And that's why Black History Month is celebrated, because in spite of, we have triumphed and we rose to significance around the world. Now, in Guyana's context, I have been so vocal about racism because like I've said, prior to 1992, I did not know what was racism. I did not. My father was a police officer, and we lived all across the country. And most of the police headquarters are in what we called East Indian areas or villages or whatever it is. So we lived, for instance, we were at Coven John, Leonora. Those were, I was exposed to, growing up, almost all of my friends were East Indians. Matter of fact, up to today, one of my friends from primary school contacted me from Canada and was reminding me about her friends and so on. And not one of the persons he reminded me who I hung out with was Black. Now, and that's significant because that's what has informed me. That's how I'm oriented and socialized. After 1992, when the PP came to power, I then began to see racism.
I saw had some little stick in there. You're back. I don't know where it's coming from, but you're back.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying
you were telling us about a friend contacting you from Canada. Yeah.
Right. A friend contacted me from Canada. He's East Indian. He was reminding me that we were friends in primary school. And he was reminding me of all the friends and teachers we had, all East Indians. To this day, most of my friends are East Indians. I said that to say that I did not know what racism was growing up to the point of 1992 when the PP came to power. And when the PP came to power, we saw a different country. We saw triumphalism. We saw marginalization of people who didn't look like them. And I want to make a point. The PPP has a strategy of accusing those of us who condemn their racism, expose their racism, saying that we are racist. It's reverse psychology, just like the KKK and the Trump people. Now, what is racism? Racism is an inherent hatred or learned hatred for people who don't look like us, and then using that hatred to act in a certain way. In other words, based on their hatred, they would then shut you out from society, marginalize you, victimize you, make sure that you don't prosper, make sure you don't have economic opportunities, make sure your business cannot thrive, make sure you can't get contracts, make sure your business cannot, or if your business applies for a contract or a professional, it is denied. It is using your inherent prejudice to inform decisions, especially if you're in power. And so what we see in Guyana is the PPP, whenever they're in power, use their inherent congenital prejudice to inform their decisions of government. So what they're basically doing every time they come to power is transform the government into an ethnocracy where they use the resources of the state only for one particular ethnic collective. And that's their support base. And that's why we have been speaking out, because Guyana belongs to everyone. I just wrote a piece that was released tonight where I spoke about how they're using Prime Minister Motley to obfuscate, hide, conceal their racism like the pigs in Animal Farm. And they're using the president of Ghana to project that they are to the world that they are this, they're not racist, they're for everybody. But when you look at the very conference that they're using these people to prop up themselves as non-racist, and no Black people in there participating in any leadership role. The only Black Guyanese that presented at that conference is Prime Minister Mark Phillips. And that's why the USAID, in a report that it was dated last year, but it just came out, it was just made available to the public, where they're calling for shared governance and they're calling for joint management of the resources of the country, because USAID recognize the racism, recognize the ethnic supremacy agenda. of the
And
PPP.
we will discuss that a little
Exactly.
bit later on. Let me bring Tacuma back here. Tacuma Ogunseye, you were part of the Cultural Revolution during the era of Black Power. The title of this program. You changed your name to Tacuma Ogunseye at a time when it was fashionable for Black people around the world to change their names. What is different today from back then in the 60s and the 70s when you changed your name from Colin Young to Tacuma Ogunseye? What has changed? What has changed? If anything at all.
From Colin Aubrey Young to Mutupe Tacuma Ogunseye. Yeah. I think a lot have changed. But in terms of the African community response to cultural and political things that involve African identity, I think that in the 60s and the 70s, the impact of the Black Power movement and the whole Black awakening struggle had impacted the Guyanese society in a profound way. Unfortunately for us, we had in Guyana, Brother Yussi Kwayana, and we developed ASCREA. And ASCREA, having embraced the African Enlightenment movement, the Black Power movement, the Pan-African movement, consciously seek to educate and organize, not only educate, but organize African people very consciously for self-emancipation and cultural reawakening, and also to try to use that awakening to influence whatever claim they could have on political and economic power in the country, recognizing that we exist in a multiracial society and that African exclusion has been a historical project of colonialism. I think that today, even though our country and our young people are exposed to more information on the internet, for one reason or the other, they seem not to be conscious enough to use that exposure to their advantage as an African community to get themselves more au fait with things Africans and to build an African consciousness. I think that in the 60s and the 70s, the declaration of African consciousness by Africans had reached a point where, for us, it was a matter of identity, it was a matter of liberation, it was a matter of pride, and we didn't have second thoughts on it. I think we have a lot, even though we have groups like AGDA is trying, and have been trying. The pervasiveness of politics, to my mind, and politics defined in a certain way that seek, as I said before, to take advantage of race, but to exclude race from the official discussion, has created a tendency, even among the most quote-unquote bright and intellectual elements in the African community, even among that strata, you see the same willingness to avoid things African and to proclaim the Africanness. They find it more easy to proclaim the party identity than the African identity.
Tacuma, you mentioned Yussi Kwayana, who was one of the founders and the coordinating elder of ASCREA. And when one talks about Black Power in Guyana, certainly his name would be in the forefront. In fact, I would go so far as to argue that he symbolizes the Black Power revolution starting in the 1960s. Tell our audience a little bit about Guyana and its significance to Blackness and Black struggle in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean.
I wasn't prepared to do this.
I know.
You know, but okay. I think that Brother Guyana stands as a bright light in the evolution of African consciousness and African politics and African struggle for, you know, cultural emancipation. And he did it fearlessly, and he was prepared to accept whatever the consequences of that commitment. And I do believe that he brought to bear to that struggle an element which I think has been and is still an important element in social and political life. And that is an element of non-corruption, an element of honesty, an element of being straight. And I think that the African Guyanese struggle benefits significantly from that. And we in ASCREA have never developed any sense or any commitment to African racism, okay, replacing white racism or Indian racism. Under Guyana guidance, you know, we understood that African struggle for liberation has to be a struggle that embraces values that will be compatible with the struggle of humanity in the wider sense for liberation. And I think that Guyana brought clarity very early to our thinking on these matters. And I think that for many of us who has been inspired by him and continue in the struggle, those are some of the undercurrents that fashion our thinking and our belief when it comes to matters of African interest and national interest.
And of course, the UC Guyana is going to be 97 in a couple of months in April. Last year, we had a forum on his life and his contribution areas, an older picture. Can you please put the Guyana picture, Mr. Operator? Brother UC Guyana would be 97. He, along with Ashton Chase, are the only two living members of the early post-colonial government, the first government in 1953. And he is still alive. Many people, young people, especially on the East Coast in Buxton and others, would have memories of Guyana as someone, as Ogunseye, that led the Black Revolution in Guyana. As an educationist, as a political person, he is certainly a Renaissance person. And we can't have a discussion about Blackness and race in Guyana without Guyana. Ogun, before I bring in Rickford again, Walter Rodney was also very pivotal in the Caribbean Black Power movement. In fact, the Caribbean Black Power movement was born in 1968 when Walter Rodney was banned from Jamaica for teaching African history. Talk a little bit about Rodney and Black Power.
Okay, I probably want to focus, because I guess a lot of your viewers will probably read Walter's book, Groundings with My Brothers, which is a very instrumental book that document his praxis in Jamaica. But I would want to deal with Walter's contribution as it relates to Guyana, because it is there I came into direct contact with Walter. Before that, I only knew Walter through his book, Groundings with My Brothers. And I feel more comfortable to discuss his contribution, from that standpoint. I think
was Walter Rodney oblivious to the question of race? Was he
no,
oblivious
he was not.
To the situation?
That is where I was going. That Walter entered the equation very conscious of the racial divisions in the country, and he entered the equation with a reputation as being an international Pan-Africanist. And Walter recognized that you can't have any resolution of Guinea's problems without a recognition of race and the role race plays in the political, economic, and social equation. And I think that he didn't shy away from discussing these matters, both in African communities and in other communities, okay? And I think in so doing, he helps to reinforce the conviction that was developed by us in Askria that there could be no resolution of Guinea's economic and social problems, or no true liberation in Guyana without the liberation of all the ethnic groups. And Walter recognized that you have to give meaning to ethnic struggles. And I think when he worked in the committee to defend Arnold Rampersad, it was deliberate, trying to bring the African community in defense of an Indian brother who we all felt was being treated badly by an African-controlled state. So Walter had addressed African communities in public, very frontal on this matter. And he appealed to them in the Africanists to use that Africanists, okay, in defense of an Indian comrade, brother, okay, against state excesses. So he didn't, he recognized race. He was very conscious of what the PPP did and was doing, okay? But he also recognized that as an African person, he has to take on board the racial equation and to use that equation to refashion national equation.
Rickford Burke, let me bring you in. Rickford, let me frontally ask you this. What do you think is the condition of Black people after 23 years of power by the PPP and now another year and a half? What that has done to the Black psyche in Guyana?
Well, it has left, it renders Black people impoverished. It has rendered Africans in Guyana in a condition of despair. And I think we as leaders have to now decide, how do we empower the Black population of Guyana? Now, I deliberately started off our discussion by outlining and establishing the impact of slavery on the people of African ancestry, and how we have been disadvantaged and impoverished and marginalized to the extent where they have, countries like the United States and other countries had to develop what was called affirmative action to make sure that they create some form of equity, parity to give us the level of development that we need. Other than that, we wouldn't go anywhere because continually these prejudices push us into the ground. That's the same thing that's happening in Guyana. But in Guyana, the context of Black empowerment seems divisive. And it is because of racism that is divisive. Because the PPP, for instance, will deny that they're racist, but then they will, right in front of you, practice racism and challenge you because you speak out about it, that you're the racist. So officially, they don't want to recognize, the PPP government doesn't want to recognize the state of the Black population. We don't have access to banking. I'm speaking generally. I'm not speaking about those who broke through. We don't have access to banking. Our businesses are not allowed to flourish. Look, the PPP came into power and they tried to shut down car care and shut down Sivons, the most prominent business people in the country. That is racism. It is their racism that is informing their decisions to exercise state power. Farmers, Black farmers are complaining that they did not get millions of dollars in the flood relief, and the government has been denied. USAID has said that the COVID relief and the flood relief has been far from equitable and transparent. So it's not Rickford Burke or David Hines saying it, it's the United States government. And so until there's a recognition of the state that the Black population is in, how impoverished we are, how disadvantaged we are, how marginalized we are, we're not going to get anywhere. And in the same report, you said you're going to come to it, but I'm happy that the international community is beginning to recognize that there is no equitable governance in the country, and that the PPP believes the resources of Guyana belong to them and the East Indian population.
Yes.
We cannot allow that to happen. And it is the same thing with Africa. And that's why we recognize in Black History Month. It is because of the devastation slavery has caused. And if you go through the diaspora in Europe and in the United States, you will see the footprint of slavery, Jim Crow laws. We have to fight for the right to be recognized as human beings after slavery. We have to fight for the right for equality to be recognized. Hey, we have a right to vote and determine what our community should look like. We have liberties and freedoms. We have to fight for that in this country. And in Europe, now in Guyana, I see we're heading back to that same place. We're fighting for equity. It is unbelievable that we're fighting racist Indians from the PPP for equity because they see themselves as Jim Crow racists, and they are trying to impose a supremacy that makes Black people second-class citizens. And but I want to say this. When we talk about these things, they call us racist because I guess we're exposing them and they're embarrassed. And so they call us racist. But we are not advocating against a race. We're advocating against conditions that people place African people in because of inherent or congenital prejudices. So if they're mistreating Amerindians, if Blacks are mistreating Amerindians, there will be the same level of advocacy. If Blacks are mistreating East Indians or Chinese or Portuguese, it will be the same level of advocacy. But as the status of affairs are here now, it is the people of African ancestry who are being marginalized and discriminated against, and against whom injustice is perpetrated against. And that's why we have to have these discussions, to bring and shed light to the fact that these inherent prejudices exist and they must be rooted out and eradicated from the society. How dare Bart Jagdeo and Irfan Ali and Anil Nandlal think that they're superior human beings to us? when we were brought from our homeland to help build this world, they're standing on the shoulders and the work for development that the people of ancestry, the people of Black ancestry created. How dare them then think that they can be superior to us when we laid the foundations for them in Guyana and other places? And so that is the perspective I want to bring to this discussion. That
and quite an important perspective. Tacuma Ogunseye, you have been around for quite a while and you've seen governments operate. And when it comes to the question of ethnic distribution of resources and how you treat the opposite ethnic group, governments, whether it was the Burnham government or on the Jagger, they tend to kind of disguise it. They weren't in your face with it. I think you will agree with Rickford that this present government and the one before, the PPP government under Jack Dio, Donald Ramatara, now Irfan Ali, and so on, they've been in your face. Why do you think that is so, Tacuma?
I agree with almost everything that Burke said, but I think that the question you pose, why? I think basically, and I'm being honest, because we allow them to do it. I mean, I want to be frank. It is hard to argue about racial oppression when you constitute the majority in the armed forces, and in terms of the balance of power, in terms, the state can't do what it want to do if we don't allow it. If we had an army that was ideologically developed like Fiji Army, they would not even think about risking it. So I'm saying that while we could criticize the PPP, we know what is the PPP intention and line of march. I'm convinced it only is happening because we allow it to happen. And we have to take self-responsibility, because at the bottom line of this, if tomorrow African people who constitute, a significant part of this country decide that we have had enough and we draw the line and we force the crisis in a certain way, the PPP can prevail. They prevail to the extent that we allow them to prevail by the kind of politics that we engage in, being led by our political party, which refuse to take on board the ethnic equation and to confront the politics from an ethnic point of view, and to engage in this democracy, this paradox. And it creates the kind of space that people like to engage you from. And I'm saying, in a society where we're talking about ethnic domination and a set of rulers deliberately, calculatively using race to marginalize another major sector of the population, and that major sector of the population, as Bert correctly points, we build this country and we engage in over 250 years of deprive of collective, generational wealth. And we don't have any reason to be timid by raising the question very frontally what Guyana means to Africans and what future Africans have in Guyana. And as things stand, the African future looks very bleak. But my major concern, I'm around for long, and I've seen, how the struggle it developed. And I'm telling you, tomorrow we could stop it. So the PPP, while they're a problem, the problem is we. And I'm being very frank.
Very frank language there, and very frank perspective, not language, very frank perspective from Tacuma Ogunseye. The PPP is doing what it's doing to Black people because we have allowed them to do it. Some of you who were on this morning knew that I was in a rage this morning, and that was precisely part of my argument. It's no accident. Ogunseye and I grew up together. from the same ideological cloth. We belong to the same political party, the Working People's Alliance. So we share this perspective. Before I bring Rickford in, Ogun, there was a 5-month impasse in 2020. It became clear during that 5 months that the government was being taken away from the coalition by a convergence of political forces inside of Guyana and outside of Guyana. And it was time clearly for decisions to be made by those who held power, who were predominantly African Guyanese. If you had something to do with what was developing in that 5 months, what would have been your stance as a political leader?
You're talking about the post-election crisis.
The 5 months era, as it became obvious that power was
I'm trying to distinguish. I'm trying to distinguish the no confidence period from the election period, so that
I'm talking about the 5 minutes, the 5 month period when it became clear that there was regime change, power was being taken away from the coalition. As a leader, what you would have done?
Okay, I've stated my position very clearly on the Walter Rodney grounds, but in a nutshell, I think that once we have gone the route of the elections, and once we had run into problems and we entered into the CARICOM agreement for recount, and we had the recount and we opened the ballot boxes, and we saw the evidence of PPP rigging and all the, the issues that were raised in that process, that the president and the African political leadership should have been very bold to say, look, these elections have been corrupted, and you can't have out of these elections a government that will be representative of the country and a government that will have the moral authority to govern by itself, and offer a power sharing arrangements with the PPP and refuse to demit power on those grounds. And in a power sharing arrangement, 50-50 between the two sides, the president and the prime minister is open for discussion whether we do rotation and whether we come to some agreement for 2 years and then we go back into the elections after we have a new voters list and so forth and so forth. My bottom line is that the African political leadership, faced with what they were faced with, should have been more visionary and recognize that if you demit power in that context, then you expose the African community, your constituency, and the wider country to the worst of the PPP, because they are being supported also by external forces. And for no other reason, okay, I think it was the biggest blunder and mistake Granger made, the PNC made, because ultimately it's Granger, the PNC, that had the capacity to make that call.
Rickford Burke, you have heard Tacuma Ogunseye. Do you agree with that perspective?
Dr. Hines, you sure you want to hear from me at this point?
Yes, I do. I want to hear from you.
Listen, I have come to the conclusion that President Granger was the weakest Black leader ever invented in the world. I have never seen a leader so weak like President Granger, and he was taken advantage of. And I can speak, and a lot of people don't know why I had criticized him so harshly, because he made himself an island. I guess his personality is to be an introvert and jump in a box and hide when he has challenges and maybe sit down and strategize by himself. But you're the president of a country. You're the leader of a political party. You're the general of an army. You don't make decisions alone. And he made all the decisions alone, from the disastrous invitation to CARICOM to violate the laws and had to be slapped down by the courts.
Do you agree, though, Rickford, that whatever decision he made, for whether they were good or bad, as Ogunseye saying, that the decision to demit office without asking for a share of the government for African Guyanese that it has exposed African Guyanese to what the beating up that they've taken since then. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And he doesn't give a damn about it. He sits down at Pearl. He doesn't speak out against the atrocities being committed against African Guyanese. His ministers are arrested, and he doesn't say anything. He has abandoned his own party.
Rickford, those ministers supported the very stance that he took.
Actually, I don't agree.
Tell me which one of them stood up when David Hines and Vincent Alexander said this is an inconclusive election and it is regime change, and what we should have as a minimum is a power sharing government rather than turning the government over to one party.
Well, I'm not sure which one of them publicly said anything, but I know there were a lot of they didn't publicly speak out, which was a problem again. But and some, like I said, David Granger had lots of opportunities to make sure that there was fairness and justice in the elections. David Granger refused to engage. Very senior leadership of the United States. As a matter of fact, a former president of the United States offered to go to Guyana to be a mediator and to blunt the efforts of Donald Trump to implement regime change in Guyana. And you know what his response was? He was the president of the country, and he said to communicate to the aides of this former president that the airport is closed and they must contact David Patterson, who was the minister in charge of the airport. That's how weak he is. That's how foolish David Granger was.
Yes, but let's get off Granger for the moment. I mean, right. I completely agree with what you're saying, and I don't want the program to degenerate into a slamming of David Granger. I'm not saying that he should not be slammed. We're talking here about the impact of bad decision making by the government of which he was head that has left Black people in the hole that we are in today. That's what I want to get us to understand.
Well, he was the head of the government.
But Tacuma said that Black people are to be blamed for where we are, starting with Granger. But Granger is not alone.
Absolutely.
Black people are to be blamed. Where do you stand on that?
Absolutely. That's why I've been saying, we've allowed them to send police to shoot our people without taking actions. We've allowed them to go to Dartmouth and send the army and others to take away the rights of people. We've allowed them to shoot down people in Berbice, in number 5 village, where they were mourning and angry about the murder of John and Isaiah Henry. We've allowed them to do this thing.
The people of Berbice came out onto the streets and said, you're not going to do this and get away. So you can't blame the people.
But they shot at them. They shot at them and there was no consequence. They went into the parliament and they gave themselves the power to raid the fund. And the MPs there stood up. But then the other rest of the country remain apathetic. This is something that bothers me.
I'm reminding you, Mr. Burke, the people of West Berbice came onto the streets for days and said, you kill our young men and we are not going to take it lying down. What happened next?
They were shot at. They were shot at.
After they were shot at, but what happened next? Why they came off the streets?
Because a political leader went and asked them to come off the street.
Okay. That is what I'm trying to get you to talk to the point raised by Ogunseye. We allow them to do it. Not just Granger, but all of us.
All of them. And we still haven't seen it. I'm not satisfied that we haven't had major protests in Guyana to make the world aware of what is happening. You have this big oil and gas company where you have the CEO of Exxon, the Prime Minister of Ghana, the Prime Minister of Barbados coming to the country, and we're allowing the PPP to get away with operating as if things are normal when they're trying to make Black people slaves in the country. I'm not sure if the black leaders, and it's not black leaders only, it's the coalition leaders, because they're East Indians who are marginalized because they support the PNC or the
But we're talking
coalition.
about black people today.
You're talking about black people today.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so I don't know where are our black leaders. I expected them to mount a protest and confront the COVID regulations aren't there anymore. Confront the police force if they want to act as the security force for the PPP. But it's not happening. And I suspect is the PPP is very good at intimidating people. And so we continue to be intimidated. We haven't built protection, right? A safety net for our people, where we project ourselves as so powerful. Somebody mentioned it earlier. We have the Black Army to consider. We have the Black Army. The Army is majority Black because of cultural orientation, the police force. But somehow the PPP has always managed to get people into the police force to do their dirty work. And I'm saying to the majority of the people in the police force, don't take unlawful instructions from your leadership. There should be enough people within the leadership of the force, these commanders, these regional commanders, to stand up and say, this is injustice. And the police force, me and my officers, we are not going to go there and brutalize people so that you can protect an unjust government, racist government. They should be doing that. The army should be doing that. That's what Tecumseh was talking about. We have allowed them to do it. And the people in the army and the Guyana police force need to start telling the government, we're not going to prop you up. We're not going to go there and brutalize people so that you could be a racist, tyrannical regime. That's what we need to see. Leadership throughout the society, in civil society, in the army, in the police force, political leadership will have to grow a backbone. Those young people in parliament are so effective in parliament. What we now have to do is find a way to make the political opposition effective outside of parliament, allow them to be able to mobilize the whole country. I'm not sure what is holding them back from mobilizing. I guess people feel, I think that the issue that we're talking about here with that period where we had the recount and we saw all the rigging that the PUP did, and the Black political leadership did nothing about it. Did not put their foot down. Did not put their feet down. Did nothing. They just allowed themselves to be railroaded by the PPP and racists. I think people are so frustrated. They've lost confidence in the political leadership, and that trust has to be built back and earned.
Rickford and Tacuma, look, our political leaders, they're representing political parties, and they're also representing the people who vote for those political parties, right? As on our side, the PNC is representing the PNC and its members, but it's also potentially representing Black people who vote for them.
Yes.
It's the problem that the party doesn't see its role in that dual way. Does it just see its role as representing the party and not representing the race? Is this the problem here, Tacuma?
Yes, I think it's a problem. It is political dishonesty and opportunism, but it is a culture that has been fashioned from the days of the founder leader. You see, we can't. People don't outlive their political conditioning for 60 years in a certain way, to the fancies of us. The African community have been conditioned, to support the PNC and to act at the whims and fancy of the PNC. The PNC have never developed, in the African community, the capacity for political action outside the PNC. They always see that as a threat to the PNC. So we have developed a political culture of extraordinary dependency on the leadership and the initiative of the party. So when the party, for whatever reason, whether it's ideological, opportunism, whatever, is incapable of providing the necessary leadership, the masses are not organized, to act in their own interest by themselves. And we still at that place. We're getting out of it slowly, but we're still at that place. And I think that that is one of the fundamental weakness in the equation, is that we haven't developed an African politics that is meaningful outside the politics of party politics. And I think that it gives the party leaders, okay, a chance to play the game that they likely like to play, okay. Now, and I'm being brutal here. Part of the PNC problem on elections and on race is they have never ever come to the point to accept that the PNC on its own have never win an elections in Guyana. Now, if and that is important. If the PNC leaders had over the years come straight with the African community on this matter and don't hide, okay, around rig elections and pretend that we had the numbers and all kinds of things, but face the reality. Look, the problem that we're losing elections is simply because we got the ethnic numbers in this ethnic equation, and build a politics from that. We would be less in this kind of problems that we find ourselves in. But we allow ourselves to be used by the Americans, okay, in the Cold War and in the anti-communist campaign, and we engage in election rigging to satisfy the US geopolitical interests, which plays against the fundamental interests of African people. And I'm saying that we still to live out that. We still to live out that because, and to come closer home, if the PNC leadership have conditioned themselves and the members to understand that the PNC by itself never win any elections because of the numbers, not necessarily because they're bad. We could forget about badness, we could forget about ideology and all of that. The numbers in the ethnic equation did not permit them to win. Then when you come to power on the basis of a coalition of forces, you would have more value and more recognition of the importance of that to you coming to power. And you would have valued it, and you would have took measures to enhance its capacity. But rather than doing that, they allow the old thinking to prevail that somehow the PNC could smart its coalition partners and prevail at some point in the future, even without coalition partners, even though the numbers are against us.
Rickford Burke?
I don't necessarily share that view, the last view that Ogunseye made. I think I think Ogunseye highlights the problem we have with the PNC, which is almost oxymoronic. Because on the one hand, we want them to be advocates for the mass that support them. And on the second hand, we want them to recognize the multi-ethnic society and multi-ethnic and racial party they need to be in order to get votes. And the PNC leadership itself, I think that's what they're all consumed by. And how do they overcome this issue? I think, first of all, we have to come to accept the politics that political parties represent the interest of their constituents. The largest constituent in the party are in the PNC are African Guyanese, but the PNC doesn't necessarily focus on that. They try to be a wider, project this, we have a wider constituents. Yes, you do, but you first have to make sure that your constituents are taken care of. That's why Region 4 didn't benefit much from the Granger administration, because they were busy spending billions of dollars in other communities, and they neglected to take care of their core constituents, which are Black people. The PPP is doing it. PPP doesn't care about multiracial, multi-ethnic society. They know that we have to go and pay those cane cutters $250,000, or else we can't get them to come out and vote the next time. The PNC has to adopt that same mentality. I am not saying the PNC should not take care of the other aspects of the coalition, but they must recognize that they have to empower their base and then move out from there. Now, this is a serious problem, Dr. Hines. The issue of political orientation of the PNC. The PNC is more caught up in the race politics of the PPP because they have to prove to the PPP that they're not racist. And so in doing so, they neglect their core base. But the PPP doesn't do that. So we have to bring the party to a point to understand your core base is Black people. And then the coalition you form would be those East Indians who do not subscribe to the racist, corrupt agenda of the PPP, and the Amerindians who the PPP have neglected. I think that coalition is a winning coalition. And the mixed race, those who are caught in between. Also, in that mixture of East Indians, you'll find some of the business community and the people in academics, people who are educated. They recognize that they don't have to become a cult member in order to exercise political independence or their political will. So that is something the party has to address. They have to come up with a strategy. They have to come up with a strategy. How do I make sure that I take care of my constituents and also project myself as, to me, the only truly multi-ethnic and multi-racial party? Because the PNC from the time I was growing up as a child has been multiracial. You had significant people with power, real power, from Kami Ramsaru to Ranjit Chanji Singh to Muhammad Shahabudin and all of those people that we grew up seeing, and Siram Prasad and Stella Odiali and Rabian Ali Khan. And they had real power as ministers. They were not just token East Indians in the party.
Let me put this proposition to you on Ogunseye. There is all this talk about crossover vote, and I think it's seeping in to our discussion here, right? The Amerindians are clear. They're breaking 60% for the PPP, 40% for the PNC or the coalition. There's no significant Portuguese vote. There's no. The PPP has figured out how to talk about crossover vote by recognizing that it will win elections by bringing out its own constituency to the polls. The PNC and the opposition side still believe that they need crossover vote to win. Their numbers show them in 2020 that if they had brought out 85% of their constituency, 40% they got from the Amerindians, they would win an election. That's the PPP. The PPP knew that it would get 60% of the Amerindian vote, and it ran up the Indian vote. And the PNC did not run up the Black vote. Our voter turnout was 70-something%. What happened to the 25% of Black people who didn't vote for the coalition? Tacuma Ogunseye.
Basically, they get alienated. But I'm going to address that, but I want to go back to the point which I think Rickford is trying to avoid. You see, politics, even if you don't want to do it in public, you got to be realistic at home. And the history the PNC have demonstrated, even with Burnham, the most popular leader, they have never been able to win over significant Indian votes to make a difference. And they have lost every single elections. This is a reality. And you have to begin, even if you don't want to say it in public, you have to begin your politics from that starting point. And there's very little evidence I've shown you, the reality I've shown you, there's very little the PNC as PNC could do to correct that problem in the very near future. Therefore, the PNC, a coalition of forces, is more important to the PNC than it was to the PPP. Okay, the demographics have changed more recent, but I'm trying to go backwards. Was always more important because the PNC have a larger deficit, okay, from their base than the PPP had or has. Therefore, that should inform our politics that we have to engage in genuine coalition politics, build principal relationships, okay, because that is the only way the PNC could come to power, and they can't come to power on their own. unless you start with that clear recognition, even if you don't want to say it publicly, in your strategizing and your internal understanding of what is open to you, your tactics and your strategy, that got to be principle. And I doubt in any PNC internal discussion, they face bruntally that reality. And once you don't face it as an army going into battle, okay, doesn't want to accept that even though we got tanks, we were told, by the army officers, we ain't got enough shells. We got thousands of tanks, we only got hundreds of shells. Therefore, our tanks will be of little use to us. We have a strategic deficit, which we have to address. Or we have to build a strategy conscious of that deficit. And I'm saying, and that is what they fail to do. David, pose back your question. You had asked me, I divert.
I'm talking about the importance of the Black constituency,
right,
to the coalition winning an election.
I mean, we in the WPA, you will know, David, 2 years before the elections, at the APMU meeting, we pointed out to them that from our observation and interaction with the people,
we held 22 community meetings across the country.
Yeah. But even before the actual community meetings, we had told them, okay, that about 15% of our historic constituency has serious problems with the government. And we suggested them that, look, we should try to hold a series of meetings similar to what we do for the elections, a major campaign among our people, and explain to them that the social contract we signed with them politically, that look, we run into problems, however you want to explain it, but objectively we have failed to deliver in a certain way. We're conscious of it. We're asking for understanding, forgiveness, and that we could collectively try to refashion a new contract, so we bring back the people into the political equation. We bring them into the equation to give you power. We run into problems, and instead of we face and bite the bullet and return to the people in an honest way, present the dilemma we face, okay, and engage in self-criticism and move forward, we treat the people with contempt. And they treat the WPA with contempt, because I'm telling you, Granger, the sister, the chairman of the PNC, Valder, Abner, Basil Williams, all of them watch us like if we have said a mad people and treat me with total contempt.
Yes.
And then after that experience,
after that is saying, because I think sometimes some of you in the audience don't pay attention. We in the WPA suggest to the PNC that, look, we should go and apologize to Black people and to let Black people know that as a government, we did not give them as much as we supposed to do for them, and apologize to them. We also suggest the cash transfer and to tell them, look, we are proposing this cash transfer as a means of ensuring that oil revenues will go to everybody, but of course it will go to Black people. And we should go to them and apologize before the election. Our partners in the PNC did not agree with us. They treated you all with contempt. That is why 25% of Black people did not vote for the coalition. So when it came time for the people to kick us out, we did not have the numbers to fight back. We could have won the election if we had gotten another 10% of the Black vote. We would have made it more difficult for them to kick us out. But we didn't go and apologize to Black people. You all don't know that. So don't cuss for Ogunseye. He knows what he's saying. Your party treat you all with contempt. That is why Aubrey Norton is a breath of fresh air, because he knows that. And he is coming and he's talking about coalition. He's talking about treating the coalition with respect. And he has begun to go into the communities, in effect, to apologize to you all. Had we done that before the election, it would have made a difference. So you all stop this nonsense. Forum here, Ogunseye.
Dr. Hanks,
yes.
I want to make a point.
Yes, go ahead.
The first point I want to make is that we must first recognize that all these political parties rig elections. The PPP has done it, and I'm pretty sure the PNC has done it in the past. And so I think we must disabuse ourselves of the fact that this burden of rig elections is on the PNC. This last election showed us that the PPP rigged elections.
Of course.
And that they won the elections based on those rigged votes.
Yes.
The second point I want to make is you made a very important point. And I'll put it in this context. The PNC, as far as I'm concerned, has never gotten an election strategy right. They have very poor management and administration of elections. You remember in 1997, they won that election, but they couldn't prove how they won. They allowed the PPP to reconstruct statements of poll out of thin air. They accepted that. Do not say, okay, we don't know what the statement of poll, so we're reconstructing it based on what somebody tell me or whatever it is. We've allowed that to happen. We have never had a proper election machinery and a strategy and executed it with precision. The third point I want to make is, and they don't take advice. When you advise them, they don't take advice. There's always this resistance to outside advice. They think they know everything. And hopefully that would change. The third thing, the PNC has not mastered elections as a science. Elections is a science. It's not guesswork. You have to know how many votes you need to beat the PPP, where they are, and how you're going to go and get them out to come and vote. You have to know what turnout percentage and margins you need in order to beat. For instance, Georgetown. Georgetown, you know, in order to offset Region 6 and Region 3, you got to bring out every voter in Georgetown, right? And so you would know how many votes you need. And you have people monitoring these things during the day. So listen, we need 10,000 more votes because you're seeing who are coming out to vote and you're presuming who they're going to vote for. That's almost like a little poll you're conducting. And then you send out a message, SOS, get 10,000 people to come and vote, mobilize them, right? It is a science. They have not mastered that science. The PPP has. Like you said, the PPP run up the Indian votes, and then they hustle through all them black communities to see 1 and 2 here and there, and then the Amerindians. We don't do that. We have not mastered. I'm a political strategist. We do that in New York. We don't lose elections, right? They have not mastered the thing. And the last point I want to make is with regard to the PNC's approach to the international community. When I was growing up, the PNC was well respected from Africa to India to Russia, all around the world. Somehow, this new set of leaders have marginalized the PNC, cut them off from the international community, cut them off from CARICOM. I mean, PNC was CARICOM. CARICOM leaders looked up to the leaders in the PNC. Now, CARICOM leaders during the recon was calling me, asking like, what's going on? We're not hearing from nobody. They're not sending me no information. How are we supposed to know what's going on? How are we supposed to know that the PP rigging this thing? They completely shut themselves and isolated the party and the coalition from the international community. This world is a global village now. It's so interconnected. The policies in Guyana could affect Washington, and Washington can affect Guyana. It therefore means you have to have a relationship. You have to have a channel. You have to be able to talk to the international leaders. The president of Guyana should be able to talk to the Congress people and the vice presidents and so on. Look what the people did. You had Barrett Jack there standing up, making pronouncements on behalf of the American government. We will sanction this person, and we have submitted a list for sanctions. How did we concede that territory to racist criminals?
Part of the reason we have conceded it, Rickford, is not just with the leaders. You listen to some of the comments here tonight, right? The mere hint of criticizing the PNC sends some people crazy.
That's fine.
But Somebody's saying here, all of this is looking back. Well, if you want to
To
cross
go
and go to the next lane, you don't have to look in your rear view mirror. For instance, knock you down the road, knock the car off the road. People sometimes talk most things. We don't realize how stupid it is. I think it's big intellectual sense. We just make the point here that as a Black people, we are not a naturally united people.
No.
I mean, I'm sure that 80% of Black people will always vote for the PNC, regardless of what. But there is 20%. I know that since I'm a little boy in the village, there are 20% of Black people who contrary. They like Burnham. But when it comes to the PNC and voting, no. We don't understand the complexity of our people. That is why Robert Corbyn must be given credit. He recognized that to bring Black people together, you have to bring all the shades of opinion under what he called a big. That is why he went to the DP, all right, and said, let's form this APNU thing. And in 2011, we won, but we didn't win the presidency. In 2015, we won and won the presidency as a coalition of forces.
It tells you that we could win elections. We can win elections.
Election on our own. They got Black people who don't dance. Right? And they got Black people who just dance. Those who dance quick, when you talk African, they love it. Those who don't dance quick, they're going to listen another tune. We are a diverse Black people. And we got different, and the sooner Black people understand that, the better for us. The Indians that too. You ever hear Muslim cause Hindu? Nasty. But when it comes to the politics, they bring their diversity together. We, on our side, if you don't go major party line, you're a madman, as some of these are saying it on the program here tonight. Tacuma Ogunseye, closing remarks.
I want to close where I left off my last comment. You see, and I'm being brutal. The PNC have never won any elections in Guyana, not necessarily because they're bad, because the ethnic numbers didn't permit it in an ethnic competition. Now, I haven't studied the demographics very carefully, but I still believe that the Indians have at least a comfortable 10% above the Africans. And therefore, we depend more on bringing together a coalition to defeat the PNC, the PPP. So the PNC has to get out of his head that they, the PNC by themselves, could win elections. History have shown they can't. And therefore, if you accept that realization, then you will realize the value of coalition politics to get you to government. And I'm around long enough, and I'm telling you this: if the new PNC leadership play the old game, of speaking coalition politics, but planning PNC domination or PNC ascendancy, they will not be able to get a coalition together to defeat the PPP. You see, we have to understand the change in dynamics with oil and gas and the possibility that new forces will come on the horizon, finances by both internal and external influences. And if the PNC don't come to grips with the evolving reality that they face and the permanent the need for them to quickly reconfigure their consciousness, because to me this is a matter of the PNC head. Because I'm telling you, I am fortunate because I'm in politics long enough. I'm a market man. I ride a bicycle around town. I don't drive a car. And given Black people's consciousness and political engagement, when they engage me, they don't engage me like if they engage in Granger. If Granger driver or PNC biggie drive the car, Black people go in a sort of mode. And they give them a sort of kind of political impression. But when they deal with guns, they feel comfortable and they give it me left, right, and center. So I know where they're strong and I know where they're weak. And I'm telling you, 99% of the engagement I have with ordinary African people who are close to the PNC, they reflect the very thinking of Granger and the PNC leaders, okay, in terms of the coalition. And they argue the WPM bring nothing, the small parties they bring nothing, all the votes come from the PNC. And that is the pervasive mentality. I think by accident. I know our people, I know our country. And you can't fool me about it. Those are my closing remarks.
Yes, they want us the WPM to the table. And we are not at the table, it's the PPP alone at the table. And we're asking, what other parties bring to the table? None of us at the table. PPP at the table because we engage in small talk, little by politics rather than big politics.
I agree with what his closing completely. I think I have been urging for the longest while that we have to have coalition politics. Of course, the PNC alone can't win an election. And of course, the PUP can't honestly win an election on its own either. Because
right.
if as Ogunseye said, they have this ethnic advantage of about 10%. But when you look at
Rickford, the PPP create 10 parties.
Exactly.
The Indian people who vex with them won't come over to we, they would go to them 10 parties. And then when the election done, they didn't ask them 10 parties will bring to the table, they bring all of them into the government. But we Black people always talk in loose talk and don't understand how we get in beat. Loose talk.
Exactly, I agree with you. And so the PNC still doesn't understand. I think now they do, I hope Aubrey does, that we have to build as wide a coalition as possible.
Yes.
Bring in women's groups in the coalition, market vendors, farmers, everybody, youth groups, women's groups, trade union groups, religious groups. Make this coalition so big and influential that it cannot be defeated. That's the mission for the PNC right now. That's how you defeat the party, the PPP. The PPP on its own cannot win an election. They don't have the numbers because, as you say, you have what? That said, there's 30-40. You have the Amerindians, about 40% support the coalition. You have the mixed race, and you have others. And plus, the PNC gets about 10% of the Indian vote. So the PNC and the coalition with the PNC, that's the majority of the electorate. And if they have a really good election strategy, a really good election machinery, they can defeat the PPP all the time. I think that's what we have to focus on. We have to forget the infighting and the factionism and focus on winning elections. That's why political parties exist, to win elections, not to fight each other internally, who support Granger, who support Norton, who support Lawrence. Let's end that nonsense. The common enemy is the PPP. The common enemy is the PPP. They are waiting at the gate to destroy, literally destroy, impoverish the coalition supporters. So we have to meet them at the gate and fight them and keep them out. That's the mission of the coalition.
Let me say something in ending. If my village boxing is anything to go by, I would like to recommend it. In 2011, we used to put together some big teams at the gas station in Buxton to go and walk around the communities. And some Georgetown PNC people who come and say, who is PNC in this group and who is WPA? And the people tell them, we is both PNC and WPA. And we village Buxton, when we know 1st of August come around, we know there's WPA story. PNC don't interfere with we. That's your story. You all deal with that. You know that when intellectual election time come around and you have to do the big mobilization, you know that's PNC story. So there is a way in which we have learned, right? Coalition building in Boston. We don't argue in Boston about what PNC brings. table, and we know that people know when they come in Boston, they say we want to organize drums, and we want to organize concert. You know, when the WPA people, that's nice thing, they mobilize. So when they come in and they say they want a big public meeting with numbers coming from all over, they gotta go to the PNC, right? We have learned to pool our resources in Boston for the common cause. We don't get into this stupid talk about who bring what to the table. We want to get together at the table. Right now, there's no table for us to bring anything. PPP alone at the table. Thank you, my brothers. Thank you, my viewers.
Thanks for having me.
Some of you all
Thank you, Jim.
We got to learn to come together. Tomorrow night I'm going to have Mr. You all know him. He's going to be making his first appearance. Yeah, no, here is him. Apostle Nigel London, political activist, speaking truth to power. That's what we're going to be doing every Thursday from now on. We're going to be bringing somebody to speak truth to power. Nigel London, tomorrow night. Until then, I'm gone.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.